Let's turn in our Bibles this morning to Mark chapter 8. Mark chapter 8 and toward the latter part there. And then we're going to go over into Luke chapter 14 as well. Mark chapter 8, verse number 34. And when he had called the people unto him with his disciples also, he said unto them, Whosoever will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whosoever will save his life shall lose it, but whosoever shall lose his life for my sake and the gospel's, the same shall save it. For what shall it profit a man if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Or what shall a man give in exchange for his soul? Whosoever therefore shall be ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him also shall the Son of Man be ashamed when he cometh in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. Luke chapter 14 and verse number 25. Luke 14, verse number 25. And there went great multitudes with him, and he turned and said unto them, If any man come to me and hate not his father and mother and wife and children and brethren and sisters, yea, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. And whosoever doth not bear his cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. For which of you, intending to build a tower, sitteth not down first and counteth the cost, whether he have sufficient to finish it? Lest haply after he hath laid the foundation and is not able to finish it, all that behold it begin to mock him, saying, This man began to build and was not able to finish. Or what king, going to make war against another king, sitteth not down first, and consulteth whether he be able with 10,000 to meet him that cometh against him with 20,000? Or else, while the other is yet a great way off, he sendeth an ambassage and desireth conditions of peace. So likewise, whosoever he be of you that forsaketh not all that he hath, he cannot be my disciple. This morning we want to focus a little bit, of course, Veterans Day weekend anyway, and we want to focus a little bit on the demands of discipleship. And of course, we can kind of think of that in the same context as a warrior, someone in the military. Of course, we're thinking veterans for this weekend. And so that idea of forsaking our own comforts and our own pleasures to be a disciple of Christ, of course, and the connection there with those who have sacrificed so much so that we may be free. And really, I would have to say that I do admire the men and women that have been willing to sacrifice and put their lives on the line, sacrificing all, really, to serve our country, to help us to be free. And of course, as the slogan goes, all gave some gave all. Of course, we focus on that more on Memorial Day. But really, even if a warrior, whatever branch of service they may have been in, if they have maybe seemingly escaped physical harm, there generally are other aspects as well. Some may have really sacrificed the emotional and mental aspect of their life and are never quite the same. And really everybody has had, anybody that's been in the military has had to have a life of some sort of sacrifice, physically, mentally, whatever it may be. That's maybe one reason why I never was all that. Maybe as a boy I might have been, because we lived right there around a Marine base, and so maybe I was a little enamored with that idea then, but I've never been very strong, and I'm not interested in being in the military. Never really had that much aspiration for that, except maybe in those early years. I guess I just didn't think I could handle it. Maybe I could, maybe I couldn't, I don't know, but I don't really think I could have very well. But I do certainly honor those who have stepped up in that way. And when we come to the scripture here, we find the whole idea here that there is a sacrifice to be a soldier for Christ, to be a part of His army. And we can sing songs about that and sound the battle cry, or onward Christian soldiers, or maybe even the children might sing, I'm in the Lord's army. So we have these different songs, but many times it means a lot more than what we really give it credit to or credit for. We may think that somehow, we just kind of accept Jesus and we head right on into heaven. But Jesus made it very clear that there is a pattern for discipleship. There are some demands that are made. He requires that we do some real careful searching. It gives us the idea there in Luke where it talks about the man building a house or the king going to war. They sit down and count the cost. And so Jesus is making that point here that you must count the cost to follow Him. And of course, in doing that, we recognize that He is our great example, and where He sacrificed and where He kept His body in subjection, we also must do the same thing. Where He went the extra mile, we also must do the same. And so when we begin to think that way, it's important for us to recognize that this is not an option. It's not just, well, if you feel like it, if you'd like to join up. You know, for years, I don't know, I suppose there was quite a number of people joining the military, but especially I noticed after 9/11, different ones that I knew, that they wanted to get involved. They wanted to step up. They wanted our country to be free. And so numbers of them would voluntarily leave whatever life they had and go into the military. It still was an option for them, and yet there was something that was kind of motivating them. For us, there is a motivation, but it's not really an option. I mean, I suppose it's an option. We at least can still choose whether or not to serve God. But of course, we recognize that the goal, the focus, our desire is heaven. And of course, when we start to look at this whole idea here of laying down our lives really for the Lord, for trying to give our all for Him, then we recognize it is a cost. There is a demand in discipleship. And of course, when you start looking at that second passage there in Luke, the wording can kind of sound curious. 3 times Jesus made reference to how certain people can't be His disciple. You kind of think that's a little strange. Can't? I mean, doesn't God want everybody to follow after Christ? Wouldn't Jesus be calling everybody to follow? Well, yes, He does. But He's saying there are certain requirements, there's some demands, and you can't follow Him without meeting those demands. There's kind of 3 basic things maybe here that He deals with. Family, comforts, possessions. Any of those can become a god, and if they do, then we're not truly able to be His disciple. Yes, we do still need to deny ourselves to please God. There are some demands that Jesus makes of us. And so let's look at several of those here quickly this morning. First of all, discipleship demands a decision. Discipleship demands a decision. I know that may seem very basic. We understand that. At least I would hope that you would. But actually, when we look at both passages, it's clear that following after Jesus is not just a passing fancy. It's not just, well, everything else was failed, I guess I'll just try Jesus. I'll see what it goes like. We'll give it a week. We'll give it a month, whatever. No. That's not what we're talking about. This is a life decision. And whatever we may say, I believe that sometimes, I guess what I'm trying to get at is sometimes we have issues where we can say we've given God everything, or we say that we're a Christian. You know, I prayed and I'm seeking after God, but it needs to be a lifelong commitment in our mind. This is not just that it's temporary. It's not just to kind of get through a difficult place in our life. And so there's a decision to be made. And of course, we read to you here this morning about the builder and the king. I've made reference to that already. But that whole issue of counting the cost, the importance of making sure that you're prepared for this. Both the builder and the king would want to count that cost before they get beyond the point of no return. You know, when they put all that money into a house and then just allowed it to languish. I know since I was a boy, I've seen it. Maybe it's down now, but for many years, I would pass by a certain road, or on a certain road, pass by a certain property, and there's a house just, there may have been OSB on the sides. I'm not sure now if it even had that far, but at least was partially built and then just left lay there, left sit. I don't know if there was, maybe it ran into some red tape or something there. I don't know what happened. But I have thought of it many times in light of this. That, they must not have counted the cost. They must not have been quite prepared to build. You have the king as well, and he's going out there about ready to lose all these men possibly. Of course, it mentions there about 10,000 going against 20,000, so very possibly he was going to be defeated. And he better think long and hard before he goes and does that. They have to count the cost. They have to recognize it demands a decision. Am I going through with this or won't I? It's an act of the will. You can maybe think of a few examples in Scripture. When Elijah came to Elisha, for example, and he puts his mantle over Elisha and is calling him to be his follower, his servant, and of course his what would you call that? The one to take over for him anyway. The one he was going to pass the baton to. The next prophet. And Elisha has a decision to be made. God called Jonah. Also a decision, wasn't it? Now, he chose wrongly at first, but God kind of got him back on the right track, and he followed. There are others, I'm sure, as well. We could look at different ones that are throughout the Scripture that there was this call. Obviously, we have it right here in the Gospels very clearly, probably at other times maybe in the Old Testament as well, but right here in the Gospels you have the disciples. And so Jesus says, come follow me, and they have to leave their nets. They have to leave their boat. They have to leave their father. And he says, come follow me. Matthew had to leave his money-changing table there, his livelihood. It's an act of the will. Jesus still calls us today to follow after him. It still requires a decision. Keep in mind the prescription here in Mark chapter 8, verse number 34. Whosoever will come after me. In other words, whoever's going to be my disciple, whoever's going to really truly follow me and ultimately make it to heaven, three things. Let him deny himself, take up his cross, follow me. Those three. It has to be a commitment from the bottom of your heart. I've decided to follow Jesus. No turning back. No turning back. The second thing I'd notice with you is discipleship demands discomfort. Discipleship demands discomfort. Now, most people probably don't like to hear this, but following Christ is not for the weak. It's not for those who are half-hearted, those who are addicted to ease. I'll confess to you, maybe it's not very nice for me to say it, but that's probably one reason why I never joined the military. I mean, there's a number of things. I knew I should be a pastor, so I just moved that direction. But I was a weakling. I didn't feel capable of it. I didn't feel like I was going to be able to handle the rigors of boot camp and various things. But following Christ, though in a different line, it doesn't require necessarily physical strength, but it does require moral strength. It requires a mental and spiritual strength. If we're going to follow after God, we must do what he requires us to do. We find those examples in Scripture, whether it's Noah or Joseph or David or Daniel or Jeremiah or John the Baptist or Paul or John the Apostle, whoever. It's all the way through. You have this whole list of characters who had to have a backbone, had to stand for God. Of course, in the past number of centuries, we have other heroes of the faith. People maybe that even gave their lives for the faith. William Tyndale, for example, or Jan or John, as we may say, Huss, burned at the stake, I believe, John Bunyan, Hudson Taylor, just many more different ones that have suffered and even died to be a disciple. It demands some discomfort. It's not always easy to just do what it requires to be a Christian. You may not always feel like doing great exploits for God. You may not feel like getting up to be able to have your devotions in the morning. You may not feel like stepping out and going to witness to somebody. It may be discomfort. There may be some times that you're not very excited about those different details. But it's just part of being a soldier. It's part of following after God. There are some demands to being a disciple. Of course, from the very beginning of this call, we can see a denial to self. Let him deny himself. Let him deny himself. Right at the very beginning. In other words, we can't be serving God just as long as we get our way or just as long as things are going well, just as long as I don't have to sacrifice too much. And again, that's part of the Christian walk that many people would like to just kind of avoid. They'd like to leave it out. But like Paul tells us in 2 Timothy 2:3, we have to be a soldier who can endure hardness. Enduring hardness as a good soldier. Maybe I'll put it this way. Comfort awaits the conqueror. But for now, we have to be committed to the cross. Discomfort. Those difficult things. But simple obedience. The last thing we'd notice with you is discipleship demands devotion. As found in both Mark and Luke, for he says that we also must carry our cross. That's a daily walk. That's doing what he wants the whole way through it. Of course, if you think about it in that context, he was very soon going to be carrying his own cross. They understood this is not a figurative thing in their mind. Maybe they saw it somewhat as more than just the cross. But I mean, crosses were the common punishment, the death penalty. They knew if I carry my cross, it's to the death. It requires devotion. And so when Jesus says it, it's a whole lot different than what we think of as maybe sometimes wooden, but maybe hung around a neck or kept on a keychain or on a bracelet or wherever. We see them all over the place. But this is not some sort of a sign of great, I don't know how I'd want to say that. It should be a sign of loyalty and devotion, but it's not. People just take notice. Oh, wow, that's really nice. You're a Christian. I see the cross. No, this was a devotion all the way to death. That's what it meant for Jesus when Jesus is saying it here. Deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me to death. Now again, this is a part that is not very comfortable to many people because we'd like to think that somehow we don't have to be different. We don't have to stand out from the crowd. We don't have to make waves. But being like Jesus does set us apart. It sets us apart in attitude, in our appearance, in those things that we accumulate or the focus that we have in life. We are set apart. We are different. Maybe just for a moment here before we conclude, I'd like to just remind you or kind of explain to you a little bit of the wording there of Jesus' message to his people as he says, let me go back, I believe it's in, let's see, in Luke 14, it is in verse number 26. And it talks about hating those. And we would think that seems really strange. How would a Christian hate father and mother and wife and children, brother and sister? How is that right? Doesn't God call us to love? And yes, he does. But of course, the idea here is that we have to kind of understand what he means by hate. Let's go back for a moment to Matthew chapter 10. Matthew chapter 10 and verse number 37. He says it this way, he that loveth father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And he that loveth son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. So the idea of hate here is not that I truly hate, but I love less. They always have to be less. They always have to be in the background, so to speak, in my love. I know our text here is a pretty strong statement, but as in Matthew, it's a comparison. It's saying, you need to love them far less than what you love me. They can't have any say when it compares to what I'm saying. And so our love for God must be far stronger than for our family, and our duty to Him is far more than to our family, and our focus on family desires. Of course, the same principle applies in our possessions as well. At the end of the passage, it refers to that as well. And so we recognize that we have to love that less. It's not saying you have to take a vow of poverty, just like he's not saying you have to literally hate your family, but they must be far below your love for me. And then, of course, the same for possessions as well. They're merely tools. Those possessions are merely tools for trying to serve God And of course, all through it, we have to allow him to govern what we possess, holding it loosely. So this morning, in conclusion, a disciple is more than just a name. It's a follower. It's a copycat. In everything, really. If we're willing to be a disciple for Jesus, we have to copy the way he lived. We have to deny ourselves. We have to take up our cross. We have to speak the way he spoke. We need to have the priorities that he showed. Could I remind you again this morning, it requires a firm decision. It demands a decision. It demands a willingness to suffer discomfort. It demands a devotion no matter what. As we've said earlier, gave that little chorus. I've decided to follow Jesus, no turning back. Though none go with me, still I will follow. I think there was another part of it, something about I'll take up the cross or whatever. It's that idea, at least, that no matter what it costs me, I will follow after Christ. We see a list of veterans over in Hebrews 11, spiritual veterans, those who lived by faith, those who in some cases died in faith. Could I just ask you, are you willing to meet the demands of being a disciple? Are you willing, no matter what it costs you, to follow after him? God still calls us to be a disciple. There are some demands that are involved. But what a privilege it is to follow after him. And as he leads, we just follow. We just do what he wants us to do. We try to please him in everything. And so this morning, are you a disciple? A true disciple? Following him no matter what? God help it to be so.